6 weeks ago, a woman in a threadbare coat handed a stranger the last $20 she had in this world. That stranger was standing on a snow-covered corner in Toronto's Regent Park neighborhood, looking like life had chewed him up and swallowed him whole. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his story. She just saw a man who looked cold and hungry, and she gave him everything she had left in her wallet. Her last $20, the money she had set aside for her daughter's school trip. Now he was standing at a podium in front of 400 people at the Fairmont Royal York Hotel, wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly rent. And he was looking directly at her. But before we get to that night, let me take you back to where it all started. Because this story, like all the best ones, begins not with money or power or fame. It begins with a woman who had almost nothing and gave it anyway. Nkechi Obi had a life that looked manageable from the outside and felt like drowning from the inside. 32 years old, single mother. A daughter named Zola, 7 years old, with her father's gap-toothed smile and her grandmother's stubbornness. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on Dundas Street East, the kind of building where the elevator broke down every other week and the radiator knocked all through January like it was trying to escape. Nkechi had come to Canada from Enugu, Nigeria, 12 years ago. She had a degree in economics. She had arrived with ambition and 2 suitcases and a belief, the kind only the young can hold without irony, that hard work would be enough. Hard work was not always enough. She learned that the slow way. She had spent 4 years getting her credentials recognized, working night shifts at a Tim Hortons while attending upgrading classes during the day. By the time she was 30, she had a decent job as a bookkeeper for a small construction company in Scarborough. It wasn't what she had dreamed of. It paid the bills, mostly. Then the company folded. The owner shook her hand, apologized, and handed her a reference letter that felt like a consolation prize. That was 14 months ago. Since then, Nkechi had been contract work here, temp job there. The employment insurance had run out 4 months ago. She was behind on rent. She had not told her mother back in Enugu. Her mother had enough problems without adding Nkechi's to the pile. What she had, what nobody could take from her, was Zola. Zola, who made up songs while she brushed her teeth. Zola, who asked hard questions like, why do some people have houses and some people don't, while Nkechi was trying to get her into her snowsuit. Zola, who still believed, at 7, that her mother could fix anything. Nkechi was working very hard not to shatter that belief. She had started doing something small to stay sane. Every Saturday morning, she cooked a big pot of soup, egusi, or jollof, or pepper soup, whatever she could afford that week. She brought a thermos of it and a folding chair to a spot near the Regent Park Community Center, where she knew the rough sleeper tended to gather, and she fed whoever showed up. She couldn't afford to do more. But she could do that. She had been doing it for almost 2 years. It had started after a bad night, the kind where the numbers wouldn't add up, no matter how many times she ran them. And she had sat on her kitchen floor and cried until there was nothing left to cry. Then she got up, made herself a cup of tea, and thought about her grandmother, who used to say, when you cannot solve your own problem, go and help someone with theirs. You will find, by the time you come back, that your own problem has become smaller. Nkechi didn't know if that was true, but it gave her somewhere to put her hands on Saturday mornings, and that was enough. The regulars knew her by name. There was old Vincent, who had been sleeping in the same doorway on Shooter Street for 3 winters, and always asked after Zola by name. There was a young Somali woman named Ifra, who was between shelters and waiting on subsidized housing, and never complained, not once. In all the months, Nkechi had known her. There was a man she knew only as the professor because he quoted poetry at her while she ladled soup into his cup. And then, One Saturday in February, there was a man she had never seen before. He was sitting on a low concrete barrier at the edge of the park, wearing clothes that were wrong for the weather. A thin jacket, not a winter coat, jeans with a tear at the knee. No gloves. He had his hands tucked under his arms, and he was staring at the ground like he was trying to read something in the snow. Nkechi noticed him, because he wasn't approaching her the way the others did. He was hanging back, watching. She had seen that before, the ones who were new to being without, who still had enough pride left to make asking feel impossible. She walked over to him. "You've been standing over there for 20 minutes, she said. "Are you hungry?" He looked up. He was somewhere in his early 40s, she guessed. Dark skin, close-cropped hair with a little gray at the temples. He had the kind of face that looked like it was used to being composed, but was doing a poor job of it today. "I'm fine," he said. "You don't look fine. You look cold." He said nothing. "I have egusi soup and rice, and I have jollof if you prefer. Come and eat." "I don't have. I didn't ask you if you have anything." She turned and walked back to her folding table. After a moment, she heard his footsteps in the snow behind her. She gave him a large portion and a cup of hot tea. He sat on a crate old Vincent had dragged over for him, and he ate in silence. Not the uncomfortable silence of someone who doesn't know what to say. The silence of someone who is so hungry they have gone past words. When he finished, he looked up. "This is the best thing I have eaten in weeks," he said. "My grandmother's recipe. She would be pleased." "Thank you." He paused. "Why do you do this? Every week?" Nkechi shrugged. "Because I can." He looked around at her setup, the thermos, the folding table, the stack of paper bowls, the small cooler. "This must cost you something. Most things worth doing cost something." He was quiet for a moment. "My name is Daniel. Nkechi." He glanced at the handwritten label on her thermos, where she'd written her name in marker so it wouldn't wander off. "Nkechi," she corrected, smiling. "Nkechi. I'm Daniel. Daniel." She poured him more tea without asking. "Are you new to the area?" He hesitated just long enough for her to notice. "Passing through," he said. She didn't push. "In this place, on this corner, you did not push. People told you what they wanted you to know." He came back the following Saturday, and the one after that. Each week, they talked a little more. She learned small things about him. He was Ghanaian by birth. He had grown up in Kumasi. He had a sister he was not on good terms with. He liked to read, but had not had much time for it lately. He spoke carefully, measured, like a man who had learned that words had consequences and had learned it the hard way. She did not learn what had brought him to that corner in Regent Park. She did not ask. What she noticed was that he was kind. When old Vincent's knee was acting up, Daniel helped him carry his bag to the shelter, 2 blocks away without being asked. When Ephra mentioned she was nervous about an immigration appointment, Daniel sat with her for half an hour, going over what to expect, like he knew the process well. When a teenage boy wandered into the park looking lost and scared, Daniel talked to him quietly until the boy's older brother showed up to collect him. He was not who he appeared to be. Nkechi felt that clearly, the way you sometimes sense something before you can name it. But she left it alone, because whoever he was underneath the thin jacket and the worn-out shoes, the man in front of her was good. And that was what mattered on a Saturday morning in February. Then came the Saturday that changed everything. It was the last week of March. The snow was finally starting to pull back, but the wind off the lake still had teeth in it. Nkechi had had a brutal week. She had been passed over for a contract position she had been certain she would get. The landlord had slid a letter under her door, polite in language and devastating in content. She had sat in her kitchen the night before, doing math on a piece of paper, crossing numbers out, adding them up differently, hoping a different arrangement would produce a different result. It did not. She had come to the park that morning because it was Saturday, and this was what she did on Saturdays. But she had brought less than usual, because she'd had to choose between more ingredients and keeping $20 in her wallet for the week ahead. By 11 o'clock, she had fed everyone who'd come. The thermos was empty, the rice was gone. There was one portion left, the one she had kept for herself, because she had skipped breakfast getting Zola ready and dropped off at her neighbor's place. Daniel arrived late. He looked tired, more tired than usual, and there was something different in his face. A weight that hadn't been there last week. He saw the empty pots. "You're all out," he said. Almost. She picked up the last container. "Here, Nkechi. That's yours. How do you know that?" "Because you've been standing here for 2 hours and you haven't eaten, and that's the only container left." "I know because I've been watching you do this every week." She pushed it into his hands. "Eat. I can't take your food, Daniel." She looked at him directly. "I have eaten today, a little. You look like you haven't eaten since yesterday. I will be fine. Take the food." He looked at the container in his hands. The rice, the remaining egusi, a piece of the chicken she had stretched into too many portions. Her lunch, her only meal until she got home. His hands tightened around it, and then something happened that Nkechi did not expect. This composed, measured man who always chose his words carefully, this man who helped strangers to carry their bags and talked scared teenagers down from ledges, this man began to cry. Not discreetly, not a single dignified tear. He lowered his head and his shoulders shook, and he cried the way a person cries when they have not cried in a very long time and the dam finally gives way. Nkechi moved without thinking. She put her arm around him. This man she had known for 6 weeks. This man she knew almost nothing about, and she held on. "It's okay," she said. "Whatever it is, it's okay. You are not alone here." She didn't know those 4 words were the most expensive things she had ever given him. He couldn't speak for a long moment. When he finally lifted his head, she handed him a napkin from the stack she always kept in her coat pocket for exactly no particular reason, and every possible reason. "I need to tell you something," he said. "You don't have to tell me anything. I want to." He took a breath. "My name is Daniel Asante Mensah, not just Daniel." She waited. "I am the founder and CEO of Asante Infrastructure Group. We build affordable housing across West Africa and in several Canadian cities. The Toronto Star ran a piece on the company last fall." He looked at the ground, then back at her. "I'm worth, by last count, considerably more than I should be. More than any one person should be." Nkechi looked at him. Then she looked at the thin jacket, the worn jeans, the tea she had poured him for 6 Saturdays. "You're telling me you're a millionaire. The papers say billionaire. I've never liked the word." She was quiet for a long time, long enough that a streetcar went by, and a dog barked somewhere, and old Vincent shouted something cheerful from across the park. "Why?" she said finally. Daniel set the food container down on the table. "Because 18 months ago, I gave a speech at a development conference. I talked about community investment, about understanding need, about how the people who design systems for the poor have usually never stood in the rain waiting for a bus. Afterward, a journalist asked me when I had last gone without something. When I had last been hungry, cold, uncertain." He paused. I didn't have an answer, and that bothered me more than I wanted to admit. He looked across the park. "My board thought I was having a breakdown. I told them I was taking a sabbatical. I came here. I wanted to know what it actually felt like. Not from a report, not from a data set, from the ground." Nkechi folded her arms. "And what did you learn?" "I learned that people like you exist." His voice was quiet. "People who have almost nothing and still show up. Every Saturday. With a thermos and a folding table, and their grandmother's soup recipe." He met her eyes, I learned that the most generous people I have ever met are the ones who can least afford to be. Nkechi was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The food. You were actually hungry those first few weeks. Yes, and you kept coming back. The soup was very good." A small smile, but no, I came back because of you. She picked up the thermos, set it down again. There was something moving through her that she didn't have a clean name for, something between anger and awe and something softer than both. "I'm not a charity case, Daniel," she said. "I know. That is not why I'm telling you this." "Then why are you telling me this?" He reached into the inside pocket of the thin jacket and pulled out a card, not a business card, a handwritten card on plain paper that looked like he had written it this morning. She took it. Read it. It was an invitation to the Toronto Construction and Community Development Gala at the Fairmont Royal York. 2 weeks away, in his handwriting, "Please come, as my guest," as the person who reminded me what any of this is actually for. Nkechi looked up. "I don't have anything to wear to something like that," she said. "You don't need anything different from what you are, Daniel. It's the Fairmont. And you fed 100 strangers for 2 years on a budget most people wouldn't use for lunch." He looked at her steadily. "You belong in any room you walk into. I promise you." She looked at the card for a long time. "The food at these things is always terrible," she said. "Almost certainly. Nothing like a proper jollof. Nothing in the world like yours." She put the card in her coat pocket. "I'll think about it." She thought about it for exactly 4 days. Then she said yes. There are things that happen in the 2 weeks between that conversation and the night of the gala that are worth knowing. The first is that a woman named Celeste, who had been rude to Nkechi in ways both large and small for longer than Nkechi liked to count, was at the park that following Tuesday. Celeste was the kind of woman who arrived at a neighborhood event and immediately began reorganizing it. She had been a board member of a local charity for 11 years and believed this entitled her to opinions about everything within a 3-block radius, including where Nkechi set up her table, which Celeste felt was in slightly the wrong spot, and the fact that Nkechi was giving away food without a permit, a point Celeste had raised 3 times with the community association. On this particular Tuesday, Celeste was walking her dog past the park when the leash got tangled around a bench leg, and she went down hard on the icy sidewalk. Phone skidded. Glove flew. She sat on the ground looking startled and furious, and a little frightened. Nkechi saw it happen. She walked over immediately, helped Celeste to her feet, retrieved the phone, untangled the leash from the bench. Celeste took the phone from her, looked at Nkechi with an expression that was not gratitude, and said, "I didn't need help, and you really should be careful about approaching people like that." Nkechi stepped back. "I was just making sure you were all right. I'm fine, and I'm still going to speak to the association about the permit issue." Nkechi nodded once. "Okay," she said, and she walked back to her table. Daniel had watched the whole thing from across the park. He came over slowly. "How do you do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "She was awful to you. You just let it go." Nkechi picked up a cup and poured herself some tea. "My mother used to say that rudeness is usually just pain that doesn't know where else to go." She shrugged. "Celeste has been unhappy for a long time. That's not my problem to fix, but it's also not something I need to carry." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply, "You are remarkable." Nkechi handed him a cup of tea. "I'm a bookkeeper from Enugu who makes good soup. Don't get carried away." He laughed, a real laugh. The first one she had heard from him. She noticed it was a good one. The night of the gala, Nkechi stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom and didn't recognize herself. Her friend Perpetua, who worked at a boutique in Kensington Market, had called in every favor she had and assembled an outfit that made Nkechi's breath catch. A deep burgundy dress, simple and floor-length, her hair up, small gold earrings that had been her mother's. Zola stood in the doorway in her pajamas, staring. "Mama," she said, "you look like the news, like the serious ladies on the news who know everything." Nkechi laughed. She crouched down and held her daughter's face. "Be good for Auntie Perpetua. I won't be late. Is the man going to be there? The one from the park?" Zola had met Daniel once briefly, when Nkechi had brought her along on a Saturday. He had crouched down to Zola's height and asked her, very seriously, what her favorite animal was and why. Zola had said elephant, because they remember everything, and Daniel had looked at her with an expression that suggested he was committing that to memory. "Yes," Nkechi said. "He'll be there. Is he your friend?" Nkechi stood up, smoothed her dress. "I think so." "Good," Zola said, with the authority of a 7-year-old who has decided something. "He has a kind face." The Fairmont Royal York Ballroom was everything Nkechi had imagined and more. Chandeliers, a string quartet, tables draped in white with flowers she couldn't name. 400 people in the kind of clothes that required maintenance. She held Daniel's arm and felt briefly, just briefly, like she was in a movie that was about to reveal it had all been a mistake. Then Daniel leaned down and said quietly, "You are the most interesting person in this room. I want you to know that before we go in." She straightened up. "Let's go." She saw Celeste at table 7. Of course she did. Toronto's charitable world was a small one. Celeste was in a silver gown that had been expensive and was working very hard. She hadn't noticed them yet. The program began. The MC, a polished man in a navy suit, worked through the awards with practiced warmth, and then he paused, and the room shifted. This evening's final and most distinguished recognition goes to an individual whose work has resulted in the development of over 3,000 affordable housing units across 3 provinces and several West African cities. A man who, until this year, gave entirely anonymously and asked for nothing in return. Ladies and gentlemen, the recipient of the Urban Development Humanitarian Award, Mr. Daniel Asante Mensah. The room rose. Daniel stood, straightened his jacket, and walked to the stage. He gripped the podium for a moment. Then he looked out at the crowd, and his eyes found Nkechi at the second table to the left, and something in his face settled. "Thank you," he said. "I'm going to skip the prepared remarks. I want to tell you a story instead." The room quieted. 6 weeks ago, I was standing on a corner in Regent Park in a coat that was not warm enough, and I looked like a man who had nowhere to be. I was doing something I perhaps cannot fully justify. I was learning something I should have already known, what it feels like to have nothing. Murmurs. A woman walked over to me. She didn't ask who I was. She didn't ask what had brought me there. She looked at me and said, "You've been standing there for 20 minutes. Are you hungry?" His voice was steady and quiet. And then she fed me. Not because she had plenty. She didn't have plenty. She fed me because she had some, and I didn't, and that was the whole of her reasoning. Silence. She is a bookkeeper, a single mother. She lives in a 2-bedroom apartment on Dundas Street East, and she shows up every Saturday with a thermos of her grandmother's recipe, and she feeds whoever comes. He paused. And on the day when all she had left was one portion, her lunch, the food she had skipped breakfast for, she handed it to me, a stranger. Without hesitation, without calculating what she might get in return. He looked at her. "Nkechi Obi is here tonight, and I want this room to understand something. Every affordable housing project we have built, every unit, every family that has a safe place to sleep tonight, that work means nothing if it doesn't begin with what she does on that corner on Saturday mornings. It begins with seeing a person, with asking if they're hungry, with giving what you have." He extended his hand toward her. "Nkechi." The spotlight found her. She stood slowly, 400 people on their feet. The sound was enormous. She pressed one hand over her mouth and stood in the light and shook. At table 7, Celeste had gone very still. She was watching the spotlight on Nkechi with an expression that had started as confusion and was moving, slowly, towards something she did not yet know how to name. Daniel came off the stage and crossed the room to her. He took her hand. "I told you," he said. "You told me the food would be terrible," she said, voice unsteady. "I stand by that." She laughed through tears. He held her hand and faced the applause and did not let go. What happened after is the part people always ask about. Someone in the room had recorded the speech. By morning, the clip had been shared 40,000 times. By the following week, it was on national news. Toronto developer credits Saturday Soup Kitchen volunteer in award speech. Nkechi did not give interviews. She had nothing against people who did, but her story was hers. She agreed to one profile piece in a small community paper in Scarborough because the journalist was a young Ghanaian-Canadian woman just starting out, and she liked the questions she asked. The story had consequences, the good kind and the hard kind. The good. Daniel's company quietly partnered with a network of community organizations to fund 12 new community kitchens in Toronto housing complexes. Nkechi was asked if she would consult on the community design component. She said yes, but only on weekends, because she had taken a full-time position with a mid-size accounting firm downtown. They had reached out to her 3 days after the speech. The hiring manager had recognized her name. She didn't raise the price of her soup. She added Saturdays at a second location. Zola was selected for an enrichment program at school, entirely on the basis of a creative writing piece she submitted about a woman who feeds people in the park. The selection committee didn't know who her mother was. They just knew the essay was extraordinarily good. "That's her own brain," Nkechi told Daniel when she found out. "Don't let anyone suggest otherwise." The hard kind. Celeste's response to the night of the gala was not immediate. It took 3 weeks and a conversation with her daughter, who was 24 and had more patience with her mother than most people would have managed. Celeste came to the park on a Saturday in April. She stood at the edge of the gathering for a while, the way new people sometimes do, not knowing if they are allowed to simply walk in. Nkechi saw her. She walked over. Celeste looked at the ground. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Several, actually. For the permit letters. For the other Tuesday." Nkechi looked at her. At the proud way she held herself even when humbling herself. At the effort this was costing her. "Would you like some soup?" Nkechi said. Celeste looked up. "After you're here. That took something." Nkechi turned and walked back to the table. "Come and sit. I made extra." Celeste followed. She came back the next Saturday with gloves and a thermos she had bought at Canadian Tire and asked, stiffly, if there was anything she could do to help. Nkechi gave her the ladle and showed her the portions. She was not the worst helper Nkechi had ever had. Nkechi and Daniel were not married at a restaurant or a hotel ballroom. They were married in Christie Pitts Park on a Saturday morning in July, because that was when they both happened to be free, and because neither of them wanted anything complicated. 53 people came. Old Vincent wore a tie. Ephra had found housing by then, and came with a friend she had met at the shelter. The professor quoted Neruda appropriately and then slightly past appropriately. Zola was the flower girl. She had requested to scatter something meaningful instead of petals. Nkechi had said, within reason. Zola scattered rice. "It's jollof rice, Mama," she announced to the assembled guests. "Because that's what brought you together." Everyone laughed. Nkechi's mother had flown in from Enugu. She was a small woman with Nkechi's eyes and the kind of quiet authority that fills a room without effort. She held Nkechi's face in both hands before the ceremony and said, in Igbo, "You did not tell me things were hard. I didn't want you to worry. I am your mother. Worrying is the work." She smoothed Nkechi's collar. "But I see now why you didn't need me to fix it. You had already done that yourself. I had help. You had a husband who loves you because you fed him soup." Her mother's eyes were bright. "That is a Nigerian love story. I approve." At the ceremony, Daniel said, his vows looking at Nkechi with the specific expression of a man who has stopped trying to be composed and no longer sees the need for it. "Nkechi," he said, "you didn't rescue me. You didn't pity me. You just handed me a bowl of soup and told me to eat. And in that, you showed me what this work is actually for. It's not for reports or for awards or for the feeling of having done something notable. It's for a bowl of food that tastes like someone's grandmother made it. It's for a folding table on a cold corner. It's for the look on a person's face when someone sees them, really sees them." He held her hands. "I see you. I will always see you." She said hers without notes. "Daniel, you came to my corner with nothing, and I gave you what I had. Not because I'm generous. I'm not always generous. I'm tired sometimes, and I run out of soup, and I don't always have enough." She glanced at Zola, who was watching with enormous seriousness. "But my grandmother taught me that when someone is in front of you, and they are hungry and you have something, you give it. That's the whole rule. There's no clause in it for whether you know who they are or what they can do for you. You just give." She squeezed his hands. "That's what I'll keep doing, for you, for Zola. For whoever shows up on Saturday morning, that is who I am." 53 people stood up in Christie Pitts Park and made a noise you would not expect from 53 people. Later, someone asked Nkechi what the most important moment of the whole story was. The speech at the Fairmont, they assumed, the viral clip, the award. She shook her head. "It was the first Saturday," she said, "when I walked over to a stranger standing on a corner and asked him if he was hungry. That was the moment. Everything else just followed from that. Because that is how it works, most of the time. Not with a grand gesture, not in a ballroom under a chandelier. In a park, in February, in a coat that isn't warm enough, when someone looks up and finds another person looking back, and the only question, the one that matters, is what you do next."